So I was not going to give myself the task of giving a talk here, but there was a speaker we had assigned to this session that pulled out a couple of weeks ago. And I thought, oh my God, here we go. Conference is collapsing. I get on to Tetsu. I said, Tetsu, we're missing a speaker now. What do you think we should do? And he came back with me with a one-line sentence that said, Rob, you give it. Okay, I'll give it. So I'm giving a talk on, well, there's a few things we've got going in the lab, but I thought one of the most advanced things we've been doing is comparing Tenecteplase with a lot of the generic forms that are under development in Asia and China and India. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. It's a little bit of a biochemical analysis, not really fundamental blue sky science, but there's a few interesting things at the end which I think might raise your interest, but I'll go through the story just... So this is almost a waste of time to tell you the story about fiber lights. Oh, hang on. I'm missing... There's a slide missing, never mind. The first slide was explaining what the fibrinolysis is, but I've lost that now. As you know, TPA has been the front line for thrombolysis, thrombolytic for drugs for patients with AIS since the mid-1990s. However, this is a slide. As you know, that's how the system works. Boring old TPA activating plasminogen and plasmin, and they're the regulatory molecules that control it, and that's the story. But the problem is, or one of the issues is, as you do know, TPA loves fibrin, but it also loves fibrinogen, but just not as much. So TPA is enhanced by fibrinogen 8-fold, by fibrin 550-fold. When you see that 550-fold activation of plasminogen by TPA, I think, fantastic. But everyone ignores the fact that fibrinogen also does the job, but, okay, it's not 500 times, but still 8. If anything increases that activity 8-fold, you'd think it would be pretty significant, wouldn't you? So bear that in mind. Fibrinogen is a serious activator of TPA-mediated plasminogen activation, just not as strong as fibrin. So although TPA is effective, it has a very short half-life, and has to be, as the clinical people know, you have to administer over 1 hour infusion to maintain a sufficiently long enough lytic state to be effective. And that causes all sorts of difficulties in emergency departments, and it's just a bit of a complication that you could do without. And to improve or to remove this problem, or to improve the practicality of TPA administration, the TPA molecule was modified way back in 1994 to extend its half-life with the hope of without interfering with its catalytic activity or its fibrin selectivity. That's what the aim was over 30 years ago, before we all learned about what else TPA does in vivo, and the CNS, and all that blood-brain barrier stuff. All that stuff was not known at the time when this modified molecule came into existence. So the modifications were only 6 amino acids, 2 changed in the Kringle domain, and 4 in the protease domain that was called Tenecteplase, or marketed as metallized. And this is the original description. It was a Genentech paper. It was actually set up by initiated with Joe Sambrook and Ed Madison back in Texas about 3 years before that. And they were trying to modify TPA early on. They got pretty advanced in modifying it with that. They were able to increase the half-life of TPA, but they lost fibrin selectivity, and they licensed it across to Genentech. And they did a saturation mutagenesis on the molecule, and they came up with this molecule, which is now Tenecteplase. And this is where the changes are. We got substitutions. One glycosylation site was removed, and another one was introduced in the first Kringle. And there was a 4 amino acid substitution in the protease domain. So those the lysine and 3 histidines would convert to alanine. What a lot of people probably would not realize, but the residue immediately adjacent to that lysine is also an alanine. So there are actually 5 alanine residues in a row in the protease domain of Tenecteplase. And if you're those of you who are interested in serine proteases, if you want to maintain, if you want to keep a protease active, you don't screw around with the protease domain, or to a minimum at least. But quite a lot was done to TPA in order to reduce its ability to be inhibited by Pi1 and to maintain its fibrin selectivity. But anyway, wrong button. This one. So just relative to TPA, this is just data comparing Tenecteplase and TPA. Tenecteplase is about 80% as effective as TPA at lysing of fibrin as TPA is. A big difference, and probably the most important difference between TPA and Tenecteplase, is its relative inability to be activated by fibrinogen. So I said TPA is activated 8-fold by fibrinogen. Tenecteplase is way less than what TPA is activated by fibrinogen. But Tenecteplase is also, it's activated by fibrin, but not as well as TPA. Right. So TPA is still the most potent lytic on fibrin compared to Tenecteplase. Although you get the impression that it's better on fibrin, it's actually slightly worse than TPA. But the big thing with Tenecteplase is that it's not activated by, or very poorly activated by fibrinogen. And just when we talk about fibrin selectivity, I mean, you hear that Tenecteplase is fibrin specific. If you look at that as a term, I mean, TPA binds to everything. Everything. It binds to so many things. You can't say it's specific to fibrin. It depends how you define specificity. Specificity is defined as it's the ratio of the rate of plasminogen activation in the presence of fibrin versus fibrinogen. That's the definition of fibrin specificity. TPA doesn't just bind to fibrin, right? It binds to a bunch of other things. But in any case, that's how the definition of fibrin selectivity is defined. So Tenecteplase has been under evaluation for stroke for quite a number of years now, and you've heard this morning it will almost certainly replace TPA, if only for the practical advantage of being given as a bolus injection. And initially, the largest, there was the biggest trial where they did head-to-head comparisons of TPA and TNK, indicated it was non-inferior to TPA, and that's enough to go forward, even though it wasn't reported to be superior. But as you heard from Bruce Campbell this morning, when you do a meta-analysis of all the TPA-TNK trials, there is a slight superiority of Tenecteplase over TPA. So getting to the topic of the talk, Tenecteplase is off patent. It's been off patent for not that many years, or long enough. It's now being produced by other pharmaceutical companies. I only know of these three, but the two in China and one in India. And the one in China is you heard a bit about that from Bruce this morning. There's this Trace 2, Trace 3 trials where they've reported beneficial effects of their Tenecteplase in Chinese clinical trials that reported recently. And the drug that's being developed by this firm, Genova, in India, called Tenecteplase, that's it's been accepted for publication in JAHA. As you can see there. So they're very advanced in not only the development but in the clinical utility of some of these component drugs, TNK comparisons. So I was approached by. I never chased this. People ask me, Rob, do you mind comparing these Tenecteplase variants with the Medcalf? I said, well, okay, I'll have a look at this for you. So I got hold of these things, and I thought, well, what are we going to expect? You got 4 different companies making the same thing. They're going to have slightly different formulations. They're going to have slightly different this, slightly different that. But at the end of the day, are any of them different from Medcalf? Or if so, to what extent? So what did we do? So I got hold of these vials. I got a single vial of from this firm here. I got a vial from 2 vials of the same lot number of this formulation of Medcalf, and I got three different lot numbers from this firm, Jiangsu Pharmaceutical Industries in China, and I got 3 separate lot numbers of Tenecteplase from the Indian firm Genova that was sent to me, and I got Medcalf from Melbourne through contacts at the Royal Melbourne Hospital and Box Hill Hospital and other places in Victoria as a comparison. And I started off with all of them in lyophilized forms. So I tried to start from the same no freeze thaw situation. So starting everything from the same baseline, so I eliminate that issue. So what do? Well, we do lots of fibrin lysis assays. It was quite straightforward for us to do that. We ran a lot of mitolytic assays using TPA-specific substrates, the 2943, the plasma-specific substrate, S2251. You've heard about that this morning. We have clot lysis assays, which I'm not a big fan of, but we did them nonetheless. And in my lab, Oscar, who's down the back there, he's developed a method. It's called the Halo fibrin lysis fluorescence assay, or I spelled that wrong there, HOF test, and that's under review with RPTH right now. So we've applied all of these formulations of Tenecteplase to all these tests, and this one. And also, I ran STS page and chromatography staining to look at the physical differences between the molecules, and also did a lot of fibrin tomographies as well. So let's just take this forward. Before I get on to the data, I just want to highlight this method that Oscar has come up with. It's based on the Halo assay, where you should put a 96 well plate. You can clot blood around the ring of these wells, and if you add a lytic to the well, you clot the blood in these rings, add the lytic, and hemoglobin that's released from the blood clot became an index of fibrinolysis. So we've changed that. We did it in two ways. One was that we used a plasma clot halo rather than whole blood halo, and we used S2251 as the readout for plasma generation. But what Oscar came up with is that we would clot human plasma in the presence of fluorescent-labeled fibrinogen. So then you'd make these halo rings with labeled fibrinogen. You clot it, now becomes labeled fibrin, right? And then the big advantage with these halo-based tests, you can let the clot stabilize. Let it sit there for half an hour, 2 hours. Let the clot become a normal clot. As opposed to clot lysis assays, when you're adding thrombin and TPA at the same time, thrombin's causing clotting, and then once the clot's formed, it's immediately lysed by TPA. You're not getting a real clot. It doesn't really form in a clot lysis assay. You don't really see cross-linking. You don't get that. You don't get clot retraction. You don't really have a clot, a normal clot. So this approach tried to address that. So when you have these tagged fibrin plasma halos, and you add your lytic to it, then the lytic will activate the plasminogen in the fibrin, in the plasma clot, right? And then the labeled fibrin degradation product will be released into the middle of the well, and you can pick it up in a plate reader. So it's really a measure. These halo-based approaches allow you to see classical fibrin breakdown, as opposed to reflections of other markers that are used as an index of fibrin lysis. So I'm just putting all the data together very quickly. So here on the left, we compared. These are the average data from 4 or 5 different batches of TPA. I've got TPA here as well. The Boehringer Ingelheim metallized. In this case, we had 4 different plasma sources of that, and you can see the ones with the 3 other recombinant variants here. The 2943 is a TPA substrate. We're measuring just really the proteolytic domain of these plasminogen activators, and they're basically indistinguishable from each other on this particular using this substrate. So when we go to this halo form, where we're using S2251 in the mixer, we're actually measuring plasma generation as opposed to fibrin breakdown. Here you can see, firstly, metallized, and all the variants that I tested, we couldn't distinguish them. But we added the TPA here just to highlight the fact that TPA is hotter than Tenecteplase. Mole for mole, it's hotter than Tenecteplase, and we see that consistently. But nonetheless, I wasn't comparing. The purpose was not to compare TPA to the lytics. I knew the answer to that, but it's really comparing the different formulations, and we can see there's really not much difference. And this is Oscar's HOF test, looking at the fluorescently tagged fibrin, and again we saw nothing that that stood out to make us think one Tenecteplase variant was different to another one. So on these enzymatic assays, we really couldn't distinguish functionally or enzymatically there was any major difference between any of these molecules. So then I went on to do some fibrosomography. I love fibrosomography. I do this myself, believe it or not. Yes, I do with these hands. And for these people who don't know what fibrosomos are, we just run STS page under non-reduced conditions. Then you separate the gel from the plates. And let's say you're running a TPA, and let's say that would be, say, where the active TPA was, or TNK. You remove those plates. Then you prepare a second gel, an agarose gel containing polymerized fibrin and they should be plasminogen. And just overlay the STS page gel on top of the agarose gel. And what happens, the TPA that's present in the STS page gel leaches to the fibrin matrix and just burns a hole in it. It's really simple. Ed Reich came up with this method in 1975. It's really old. That was it. So I ran the fibrosomogram initially comparing metallized with Recombigen, which is one of the Chinese formulations. You can see here's a dose response from 0.1 nanomole to 50 nanomolar of metallized against one of the vials of Recombigen. They've got the right molecular weight. There's no other additional variance there, and they're all following a similar dose response pattern, which is good. And I thought, well, I'll get the second vial I gave you, although it's the same lot number. And in this case, I got TNK from a sample from Box Hill Hospital here. And again, you see something very similar. Couldn't really see any major differences with Recombigen against metallized. Using the fibrosomogram, I compared three different metallized against the three different lot numbers of Tenecteplase, the Indian preparation. And again, you see dose response from 1 to 50 nanomolar. They're all... You could think I ran the same thing 4 times, right? You would think I ran the same thing 4 times. And I thought, I never get that. That's what I saw. And by the way, every preparation I get from TPA to Tenecteplase, they all have this dimer in it. There's always this dimeric form of TPA and TNK in all of the preparations we have. So that was the Indian one, and then the other Chinese variant, this Jiangsu formulation. Again, a similar dose response. I just let that cook a bit longer. You can see the dimer that's picking up here. Again, it looked like I ran it again, or the same thing. But I think you can see on these basic enzyme activity assays, either hematolytically or functionally on these fibrosomograms, you would think someone just bought metallized and just put their own labels on it, right? But they didn't do that. So in any case, they're all very close. Now, we finally can come up with something where there's a difference, right? So I'm going to introduce you to remind you about single chain versus 2-chain TPA or Tenecteplase. Now, it's a long history in fibrinolysis, but no one really has worried about it in thrombolysis. And to the extent that it's relevant clinically is still an open question, but it's still a very interesting question biologically. So what's all this single chain, 2-chain all about? So it's been known for an awful long time that there are 2 forms of TPA. The single chain form and the cleaved 2-chain form. Now, just to preface this, in the field of serine proteases, all proteases except one are formed as an inactive zymogen. All of them. Urokinase, chymotrypsin, they're all made inactive as classical zymogens. And they become active. Factor 12, inactive becomes active. I mean, it's classical zymogen, right? And they are converted by cleavage into a 2-chain active form. That's classical zymogenicity. TPA, the only one of all the serine proteases, is actually made very active already as a single-chain molecule. And I don't know why. I don't know the answer to that. But that's just a fact of life. But it's not... Oops, I keep pressing the wrong button. When you convert TPA from single to 2-chain, you do change its catalytic activity. It depends who you read about this. It's at least 3 to 5-fold, and Ed Madison early papers, he reported it was a 10-fold increase. So it does go up significantly, but it's already high to start with, right? but it's still, there's this conversion exists. And the way it converts, it's a plasma-mediated event. Plasma, it's a feed forward, like TPA is activating plasminogen plasma, and plasma is feeding back onto TPA to make it 2-chain, to make it even more active, right? And this is meant, it's reported or presumed or hypothesized that this conversion will occur on the clot surface where plasma is being highly generated. So you sort of accelerate the process. But you can imagine if you were completely zymogenic, you'd be binding the fibrin inactive, then you're converting on site there and then. But in TPA, it's already getting it hot or semi-hot. Anyway, let's look at this. Recent work from Denny Vivian's lab has actually come up with some very interesting results showing biological differences outside of classical plasminogen activation, but on activating other cells. And he's reported that the single-chain form of TPA has biological activities on neurons and on some other aspects of cerebral biology that 2-chain TPA lacks, right? To do with the receptor engagement and other things which are still a bit mysterious to me. But there is a distinction in the biological activity of these forms which is not necessarily linked to the plasminogen activation itself. Just to show where this cleavage event occurs, here's TPA. I mean, it's also the same for Tenecteplase, of course. Here's the plasmin cleavage side. That arginine isoleucine plasmin cleaves between those two residues there, and in doing so, it makes a second chain, but those two chains are held together by that disulfide bond. So if you look at an STS page gel, you wouldn't know if it's single chain or 2-chain because it's held together by a disulfide bond. The only way you can see if the chains are being created is that you've got to reduce it. You reduce that disulfide bond with DTT, and then you'll see the 2 chains. So I got hold of these formulations of Tenecteplase from everywhere, and this is just, and I ran 30 micrograms of each one. There's three separate forms of metallized, 3 different forms of, you can see them all up here. Run them all in this page shell and stain them with Kamasi. And you see, well, they're all pretty similar, but you wouldn't know if they're all single chain or all 2-chain or all mixed. You just wouldn't know because it's that disulfide bond is going to keep the 2 chains together whether it's cleaved or not. In any case, you see the preparations from all the firms are relatively clean, albeit this is the Kamasi stain or the silver stain, and who knows, if you look at this more intensively, you might see other impurities that are different from one preparation to the other. I haven't got that far yet, but you can see fundamentally it's reasonably good. But let's see what happens when we reduce it, right? And then we break that disulfide bond and see how that changes now. So this is where you see a difference. So these are the 3 forms of metallized. You see there's a very large proportion of the 2-chain T and K is present in the metallized formulation. And interestingly, in all of the other ones, no matter where it came from, they all seem to be the same. It's like all these guys have got the same thing, right? So in the production of these forms of Tenecteplase with these other companies, they seem to have a more purified, a more homogeneous solution of single-chain Tenecteplase compared to the metallized formulation. And just quantitating those signals, it's about a 2 to 3-fold difference in the amount of 2-chain presence here compared to metallized. Now, that's the conclusion. So I think it's based on the assays we've looked at so far, it's pretty clear that enzymatically they're very close. I can't make a call that one's better than the other. If maybe you drill a bit harder, you might find something if you do it many, many, many times, but fundamentally they're not that different. The molecular size, the fibrosomograms confirm that the sizes are correct, but the only difference we're seeing is the fact that the Boehringer preparation has a greater percentage of 2-chain Tenecteplase in it. Now, the extent to which that matters, we don't know. It may not matter. I mean, I think what I'm resting on here is that I think you're better off to have a larger percentage of single chain, because you don't want to have an active molecule in the plasma, right? You want to keep activity maximal on the clot, where the conversion should occur. Right? You want to have minimal systemic activation of plasminogen. Now, Tenecteplase already has a bit of a big advantage over TPA because it has less systemic activation anyway, because it's less activated by fibrinogen. So it's already pretty safe in that domain as it is. But you're better off to have even less if you can, and to maximise that on the clot surface. And when I was going through all this, I got very curious about this single-chain, two-chain business, and I was trying to see, has anyone ever shown that single-chain TPO TNK actually converts in vivo in humans? Has anyone ever done it? No. It's never been. I've never seen it. It's just hypothesized that it converts. So there's a fifth formulation of TPA and Tenecteplase, and that's the one I've made. So I've now made this, and now put his tags onto them. And now I can trace them, right? And that'll be my next talk. I'll give you another time. But now I can actually see, I will be able to see the extent to which this conversion actually occurs. And with the his tag, I also track where they're landing in the brain as well. But anyway, that's for another day. So, I mean, I would say activity-wise, it's pretty close. I'm not saying that all these molecules have other similarities, binding to receptors and that sort of business. Clearance rates, I haven't looked at it. I haven't got down there. But at least on these activity levels, they're looking very close, as far as I can see. And with that, I'd like to thank Oscar down there, our sound man, video man, web page designer, and Hof-test expert. And Isabel Tippett in my lab, and a lot of my clinical friends around Melbourne and interstate who have helped me source, or actually approached me to do this in the first place. And with that, I'll say thank you, Tom.